The release of these steroid hormones from the adrenals, in particular testosterone and some of its related derivatives, are mainly activated by competition. It's pretty interesting. There's a lot of evidence in animals and humans that competitive scenarios, at least short-lived competitive scenarios, can liberate testosterone from the adrenals. So let's talk about competition, because it turns out that competition is a powerful influence on the sex steroid hormones, and the sex steroid hormones powerfully influence competition. So most people don't realize this, but most males of a given mammalian species never get to reproduce. In fact, they never even get to have sex at all. And we don't often think about that, but testosterone plays a powerful role in determining which members of a given species will get to reproduce, which ones of that species will actually get access to females. And so here I'm not talking about humans specifically, but it's well known in species like elephant seals, in species like antlered animals and rams, for instance, that the higher levels of testosterone correlate with access to females. Now, one interpretation of this is that the females are detecting which males have high testosterone and selecting them. They're more receptive to them. But it's actually more so that the males that have higher testosterone forage further and will fight harder for the females. And this is really interesting because there's very good evidence now that testosterone can reduce anxiety, promote novelty seeking, and promote competitive interactions. And so before you leap too far with this in your mind and think about all these human behaviors, just stay with me because there's a little bit of biology here that makes it all make sense. And it turns out to be pretty simple. We have a brain region called the amygdala. In Latin, that just means almond, but the amygdala is most famous for its role in fear. We hear a lot about fear and the amygdala, but the amygdala is really involved in threat detection. It sets our thresholds for anxiety and what we consider scary or too much. Testosterone, secreted from the gonads and elsewhere in the body, binds to the amygdala and changes the threshold for stress. So I've said before on previous versions of this podcast and on other podcasts that testosterone has this incredible effect of making effort feel good. But what I was really referring to is the fact that testosterone lowers stress and anxiety, in particular in males of a given species. Testosterone increases generally lead to more foraging, more novelty seeking, increases in libido, and increases in desire to mate. So it is the case that increases in testosterone promote competitive and foraging type behaviors in humans and in non-human mammals. But it's also true that competition itself can increase androgens such as testosterone. Now, some people have come to the conclusion that if you win, your testosterone goes up, and if you lose, your testosterone goes down. And to some extent that's true, but that's not a direct effect on the gonads. That's actually mediated by the neuromodulator dopamine. We talked about dopamine in the episode on motivation and drive, and dopamine and testosterone have a remarkable interplay in the body. Dopamine is actually released in the brain in ways that has the pituitary, this gland that sits over the roof of your mouth, release certain hormones that then go on to promote the release of more testosterone. And indeed, winning promotes more dopamine and later more testosterone. However, in the short term, just competing increases testosterone independent of whether or not you win or lose. And many of you have heard me talk about this before, and I'm not going to belabor the point that viewing bright light within the first hour of waking, whether or not it's from artificial light or ideally from sunlight, has these powerful effects on sleep and wakefulness. But we have to return to this if you want to understand how light can impact hormones, because hormones, light, and dopamine have a very close-knit relationship, so much so that your light viewing behavior can actually have a direct effect on hormone levels and fertility. I think most people don't really understand how powerful this relationship is between light, dopamine, hormones. And when dopamine levels are high, as I mentioned before, there's a tendency for more gonadotropin-releasing hormone, luteinizing hormone, follicle-stimulating hormone, all the hormones that come from the hypothalamic pituitary axis and stimulate estrogen and testosterone release from the ovary and testes. So how does this translate to a protocol? If you want to optimize testosterone and estrogen, you need to get your light viewing behavior correct. It's not just about optimizing your sleep, which is also important. It's about getting sufficient amount of light in your eyes so you have sufficient levels of dopamine. So the simple protocols for that I've reviewed before, but it means getting anywhere from 2 to 10 minutes of bright light exposure in your eyes early in the day. It is not sufficient to do this with sunglasses unless you have to do that for safety reasons. It's fine to wear prescription lenses and contacts. If you can't get sunlight for whatever reason, you want to use bright artificial light. But that is absolutely critical for timing the cortisol release properly, limiting cortisol release to the early part of the day, getting increases in dopamine that are going to promote the production of testosterone and estrogen to healthy levels. The other aspect of light viewing behavior that's extremely important is to avoid bright light exposure to your eyes in the middle of the night. If you're viewing bright light in the middle of the night, you are suppressing dopamine release. If you're suppressing dopamine release, you are suppressing testosterone levels. So you can't even begin to talk about supplements and other ways to optimize testosterone, diet and its effects on testosterone and estrogen and fertility and reproductive behavior, etc., until you get your breathing right, until you get things like your light viewing behavior right. So bright light early in the day and throughout the day is great. And avoiding bright light in the middle of the night is not just about not disrupting your sleep. It's also about optimizing the sex steroid hormones. So now let's talk about the role of specific compounds, many of which can be taken in supplementation form to optimize sex steroid hormones. It's very clear that certain collections of nutrients are useful for promoting testosterone and estrogen production in their proper ratios. And those things are what I would call the sort of usual suspects. Vitamin D, which is important for so many biological functions, including endocrine functions, zinc, magnesium, etc. One of the things that's been shown time and time again to have very negative effects on sex steroid hormones, testosterone mainly in men, estrogen mainly in women, is opioids. The opioids dramatically reduce levels of testosterone and estrogen, and they do that mainly by disrupting the receptors on gonadotropin-releasing hormone neurons, these neurons within the hypothalamus that communicate to the pituitary. And in fact, people that take large amounts of opioids or even take low levels of opioids for long periods of time will develop all sorts of endocrine syndromes. That's been shown over and over again. Gynecomastia, or male breast development in males, disruptions to the ovary in females. It's really a quite terrible situation. So excessive opioids are very problematic for sex steroid hormones. Now, there's an entire industry devoted to supplements and various things that people can take to increase testosterone, some of which have scientific data to support them, some of which do not, and some of which have anecdotal support, and some of which do not. There are supplements, in particular Tonga Ali, which has this other name. It's something called Tonga Ali. Sometimes it's called, and these forgive me that it's hard to pronounce, but Uricoma longifolia Jack. This has been shown in several studies, and you can find these on examine.com, or you can go to PubMed if you like. I've looked at these, that it does seem to have some pro-fertility, pro-free testosterone, and subtle aphrodisiac effects. It does also seem to be a slight anti-estrogen. So the reports of this are people take this anywhere from 400 to 800 milligrams a day. Again, I'm not suggesting you do that, but that's kind of what's out there. And there is some decent scientific literature to support the fact that it liberates some of the bound testosterone and allows more free testosterone to be available. Some of the reported quote-unquote side effects are things like excessive alertness and insomnia if it's taken too late in the day and so forth. But I encourage you to explore that further if increasing free testosterone is something that you're interested in doing.
Thanks for watching. If you found this information helpful, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more health and wellness tips.